So, part of the stories of the past, I guess, that are mentioned in the Quran are the story of Joseph and his brothers. And it's difficult to understand what to use as kind of like the overarching kind of story or narrative that we can kind of learn from or use it as a way to kind of provide some kind of introduction to how to create a topic around it. So, off the top of my head, there's one that involves jealousy because at the very beginning, Joseph, as a young boy, has a dream and he explains it to his father, who's also a prophet. And his father says to him, don't tell this dream to your brothers because they'll be jealous. So, jealousy is a difficult emotion to kind of describe, but it usually is seeing somebody, and it typically ends up being somebody who's close to you. So, somebody that you know who has something of a gift or something that maybe you don't have, or maybe you do have, but for some reason you almost wish that they didn't have it or something. It's really hard to kind of grasp what it is. So it's almost the reason that it's kind of like a dangerous emotion is because the underlying kind of meaning of it is that you're not satisfied with what God has given you or what God's allowing other people to have, right? So it's almost like, are you questioning what the universe is allowing in other people? Like, why aren't you satisfied with what you have? So, going into this, we find out that he gets sort of used by his brothers, where he is encouraged to join in play with them outside, like in a kind of far distant place. And they come back to their father saying, we lost him, and maybe while we were playing, it looks like some wild animal ate him. And they came with like a shirt that he would have been wearing, I guess, and put on it almost like false blood to indicate that, yeah, it looks like, some wild animal got to him. So because he's a prophet, he understood that, okay, well, I mean, what am I going to do? I can't call you out. I can't bring him back. I'm just going to have to wait. So later on, he is tested, Prophet Joseph is tested with uh, a type of his own kind of patience, where uh, one of the it's like a collection of women who worked for the king, and one, I guess, the wife of the king at the time had a sort of affinity for Joseph. He was known for his beauty, and so she tried to seduce him. And the story doesn't really tell us if he, like, what his reaction was, other than that he's grateful that he didn't sort of incline back to her. So he chose, and he prayed later on that he would be imprisoned so that he wouldn't almost follow this inclination of almost looking like he's got, like a harem of women who almost want to have him as some kind of like object of affection. So with that, later on in the story, there's something to be said about how um, it's kind of like the evil eye, where because Joseph had, I think, 12 sons or 11 sons. That could be something that people um, almost wonder about, like, what does your family have, and what is it that's going to offer a society, and that kind of line of thinking can create that evil eye where people almost want to take away what blessing that can bring. So what Joseph had suggested is that when they do enter, like if they travel in a caravan and they're going somewhere, not to travel in a large group as a family, because it's almost to say like, and back then, I guess it was kind of the understanding that if you have boys, they're kind of making money for you, and so if you can imagine, like, you have all this income coming in, so it's just in a lot of ways it could be a source of envy, and it could kind of backfire on people. So from Joseph's perspective, it was, don't, it's like, take precaution, right? Like, we understand fate, we understand humankind, but it's important to understand that some people's emotions are malevolent, and for whatever reason that vibe ends up being in the world, and it has to kind of strike somewhere. So disperse in a way, so don't always be walking as a collective. So later on, further in the story, we find out that eventually Joseph kind of overcomes all these obstacles and ends up working for the king in like a minister of finance position. So if you think of this as a broad scenario, and the story is kind of given as a kind of coherent story that's kind of sequential in the Quran, um, it's actually quite detailed, but I only kind of gave a synopsis of it just to kind of pinpoint some of the things that I always remember from it, and I hope that that kind of communicates that everyone is welcome to kind of take from the story what they want. And the reason I'm giving this story is that sometimes we don't know the kinds of friends that we have. I read a Facebook page or like a Facebook post. I think it might have been an Instagram post. And in it, it said, if you have a jealous friend, you need to let go of that friend. So it almost seems like, how do you know? How do you know like what's a good friend, and how do you know that someone's genuinely happy for what your success looks like? So when I was studying at Carleton, I'm generally the kind of person that when I'm studying something, it takes me a very long time to comprehend it, and especially if it's something that I have no background information about. So because my background was applied science around the like psychology and parenting and the almost like family relations and child studies, like all of that, it's very different than the humanities. There isn't that theory of how do we think about the world. So when I did go to Carleton, I was studying, um, I wanted to study that. I wanted to study religion and public life. And before actually going into the master's program, which was a year, I had to do a qualifying year, which is almost to say, like, here's a year to help segue you into the actual master's program, since you don't really have the degree, like the undergrad, which would have had the prerequisites for you to just go into the program directly, the master's program. So the first semester was great. I loved it. It was basically me taking uh, the major religions of the world in I think 5 different courses. So I got kind of like a broad preview of some of the ways you can think about the Asian religions, the Abrahamic religions, and then one of them was kind of focused on Hinduism. One of them was focused on Judaism, and then the last one was kind of a talk about the progression of how through time we used to think of natural causes or the universe as magic, and then it went to spirits, and then as we kind of understood how to understand science, we almost pulled away from that natural kind of phenomenon, and instead of thinking of it as supernatural or something that's kind of divine, we just start to think of it as kind of like a scientific method that's measurable, and anything outside of that kind of brings a type of skepticism. So having all of this, and when I went back, when I started, my idea of organized religion was very, it was kind of disattached in a way. So I didn't really think of myself as religious per se. Like I'd sometimes go to like the mosque, or like what's called a temple, basically a place to worship. But I had almost kind of stepped away from wanting to almost place myself in a group that would define my practices in a certain way. So I almost wanted a spiritual understanding that was um, specific to me and that couldn't be generalized with any particular person. But I didn't really know what that was. And that's typically what's called Sufism. And I hadn't, at the time, I hadn't really known very much about Sufism, or like what scholars to read who might have talked about it in the past. So I went in almost like just really happy that there was a professor there who kind of specialized in this, or kind of had a little bit of background about what Sufism was. So I was already kind of like reassured. I'm like, okay, this is going to be like an okay kind of new beginning for me, like a new direction. So who knows what happens? Like I talked about one of the videos that I made, that in the Quran, there's kind of mention of beware of the footsteps of inclinations that will kind of distract you from what your focuses are. And we never really know what those will be. It's never anything that's like a stark uh, straying of what maybe your focus was. It's a very gradual process, right? So that's why it's very difficult to pick up on it. And it's not until you're like really entrenched that you're like, how did I get here? And like you don't even recognize yourself from maybe if you were to kind of compare who you were from before to like where you found yourself. So I I think it was second semester. The first semester I had done really well. Like I really loved studying and I didn't really take time off to socialize. At the very beginning, um, one of the girls that I had gone to school with during my undergrad year ended up actually um, studying with me. So at the very beginning of the semester in September, we kind of hung out maybe a handful of times, but then throughout the semester we kind of lost touch. And it was just me and I think maybe two or three other girls that like I met through the different classes that I was taking that we'd study together, but still not very much of a social life. So second semester when I went back, there was just this like massive shift and I couldn't figure out what it was. But I felt really paranoid. Like, and I talk about this a little bit in my blog, Myth of Truth, where I wasn't really sure, like, I couldn't put a finger on why all of a sudden I felt like there was just a different kind of focus on me. And it was almost a way to dissuade me from what I was doing, like almost to kind of put obstacles and stand in the way of my success or like my progress or my studies. So I was just like, okay, whatever. Maybe I'm just stressed and I'm like imagining things. But anyway, halfway through this semester, one of the girls was she I guess she noticed that my shift in behavior was like kind of obvious. So she's like when I wouldn't tell her what was wrong, I was just like, no, I don't think there's anything wrong and I'm trying to kind of work through it. And she's like, oh, you must be in love. Like there must be something um that's got you sort of not wanting to talk about it, but it's distracting you, right? And that could be the first thing that comes to people's mind is that like usually in university that is a very common experience. But to me, it was almost like, where did that come from? Like I don't talk with anybody. But then what we know of certain faculty and sometimes like this is kind of like taboo, but like student and faculty or TA kind of relations is almost like we don't know how to understand that. So I was like, oh, okay. So then I just started to go with that. I was like, okay, well, let's imagine, like, okay, for example, and so from there, it's almost like that is what happens with suggestions. Like I talked about before, if somebody gives you a suggestion and your immediate reaction is no, and then you want to revisit it after, you have to kind of almost be careful too, because what if it's not like a healthy insinuation for you? How are you supposed to know? But for me at the time, I think I was 26. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. Like the last time I remember like having a crush or kind of like thinking about someone in a kind of romantic way was like way back when I was 18 or like 17. So it was kind of new to me. Like it was almost like I almost kind of shelved the idea because, like I mentioned, the whole chaperoning and marriage process for me just had looked so orchestrated that I almost kind of gave up hope on myself. I was like, whatever, if I don't meet anybody, that's fine. I like my life, just focus on studies and such. So anyway, my semester was kind of getting just really rocky because the second semester courses that I was taking were geared around seminars and studying something and kind of discussing it in kind of like a small group setting and being stressed, my mind was not absorbing anything. Like it took me forever to be able to read something and think back like, okay, what did I just read? Nothing. Like it was a very difficult process for me. So then I just dropped everything and I was like, all right. So it was kind of like that first experience of first year university where I was like, okay, maybe I'll just let my mind relax. And I just kind of went with it. And halfway through the semester, I was actually planning on dropping out. But one of the advisors there was like, we'll just finish the year. Like, I ended up actually dropping two of the classes. I was taking five. Dropped two of them. And then I think I kept three. Um, and so that's all it was. And I wasn't really sure what to do with, like, do you know how there's sometimes subliminal messages? Like some people who, and I took a psychology of thinking class, and um, the belief is that it's a fallacy, right? So if there's like a video that you're watching and they have almost like the video happening as like the overlay, and then they're trying to kind of flash different images in the background, is it actually going to be something your mind picks up and then tries to think about? So it's a less obvious um, idea of what like a very in your face insinuation or like a friend's suggestion might be, but it's still there. And so the question was, does your mind pick up on it? And it's an interesting question because I had taken a sociology class in high school. I think it was in grade 10 or 11. And we had a guest speaker who was talking about when he watches television, he actually, if he sees something that he doesn't agree with, he'll actually talk it out loud. So if there are people who are, for example, uh, I don't know, getting into a fight and it's over something maybe that's not significant, but maybe because um, I don't know, they had a lot to drink and it's maybe over like whether or not they should drive, something like that. He will actually talk to himself and see what the correct response would be, almost to help his mind just not be like a passive recipient of information and then have to kind of muddle through it. So it's almost like he's allowing himself that shortcut, like less work for my brain and I'll just be able to continue afterwards. So it's a very proactive understanding of life and basically how to engage with life. So at the time, I was like, that's curious. I kind of shelved the idea and I didn't really think much of it. And then, so back to this kind of last semester of mine, um, I started to wonder about how um, when a person is actually experiencing emotions of attraction or looking forward in the world, like it's difficult to know um, why that just comes to the fore and everything almost falls to the background. And I had taken a social psychology class, and I remember the professor saying that it's almost like that honeymoon phase of a relationship or like after a wedding, where the emotion of love is so intense that you can't focus on anything. And she says it's a grateful thing, or it's like a good thing that that phase is known as a honeymoon phase and that it ends, because you almost need to get over that high so that you can actually get back to life and get back to work and be able to function. So it's almost to say that it takes so much of it consumes like so much of your brain and your energy and basically your ability to focus, that we almost allow that, and we've given it a name and we've given it a process so that we almost know to anticipate this and to give people time, and then after that we gradually kind of find a normal and then we kind of move on. So me experiencing this was almost like I didn't know that I was picking up on these little cues, and I started to wonder if I'm reading into things too much. So whenever I'd go on the internet, I was like, are some of these articles like really geared towards what could be called fetishes? Like sometimes people almost want to assess like what is it that you're thinking, or how do we draw more out of you? Because I'm an introvert and I am very I guess difficult to read. Like my face when I'm kind of neutral just looks grumpy for some reason, or it looks sad, but I'm just deep in thought, or maybe I'm just not really thinking about much and I'm just kind of neutral. So I started to and because when I'm writing essays also, and I think this is a common practice, is that sometimes when you're writing something and you want to see how it sounds, you read it out loud, right? So I started talking to myself out loud and just kind of expressing my emotions out loud. And gradually, I found myself talking to myself like a lot. And so when I left, um, I ended up leaving in June. So I think during the summer, I was part of a TA, uh, kind of like part of, because I was on a scholarship. So I had, I think from might have been April to June, there was a semester where I was TAing for two courses, I think. So during that time, I allowed myself to kind of just relax into this process of, okay, what if I find love and what is it? And I was thinking about it in all the contentious ways, like just letting myself completely go and listening to music, and that just like completely just dove me. Like I was, you could say that I wasn't myself. Like I was exercising a lot, so the music in the workouts was just all, it's all love and typical songs, right? And my mind hasn't really changed since. So every time but I'm aware that like is my mind just paying more attention to what love is in the world and how it can kind of manifest. And this is 12 years going, right? So I never really shifted to the idea of what is it to manifest something in the world. So up to that point at 26, I hadn't really thought much about jinn, or like spirits kind of embodying people or angels embodying people. And I do know that when people go to study, because it's really recommended and it's a very commended thing, and like from a metaphysical perspective, that angels almost are there with you. So they spread their wings as almost to say, we're going to pave a way for you to help you understand what it is you're trying to study, and maybe um, almost redirect things as they were, right? So to think about it now, like 12 years later, it's almost like this was the most stressful period of my life, and it's still very stressful because I feel like I'm completely outside of who I am, but I see that I am evolving. But the only way I can see myself as not who I used to be is because nobody in my family or my friends, like after that point when I was 26 recognize who I am, and they just, and I lost touch with them because when I came back I felt like there was still that gap where they were almost treating me as though it's not me that they remember, and almost trying to like also pick at me and almost like pull me apart and like what happened. So I really don't know what to explain other than that what does happen, like if a jinn sort of aligns with us or an angel aligns with us, do we as like a corporal and like intellectual person just pause somewhere in time and then this life almost kind of takes over for us? And it's hard to say, like I'm still kind of in a conundrum about how to think about this. So when I came back, a lot of my mom's friends or my dad's friends were thinking of, you know what, maybe she's just had a very stressful year, and why don't you think of like finding her a suitor or something? So already in my mind, I was like, I already feel really paranoid, even though I'm thinking about love. I was just like, nah. And there's that whole contentiousness around um, a woman not having married, like had an informal relationship before like a formal wedding, right? It's different with different families, but being like someone from a conservative family, that was almost the expectation. So I was just like, whatever. I'm not going to pretend that my thoughts and my ideas about love are what might be seen as traditional. So people might just assume like, no, you're too secular or whatever it is. And I was just like, I don't need to defend myself about that. So I just didn't give it like a wholehearted effort. Whenever people would come, it was just like, just being kind about it, and it was never anything beyond like one or two meetings. So um I almost wanted to wonder just recently about how in the ninth month, where we fast, it's kind of understood that the archangel visits and is more likely to be kind of like in this mundane world as it is. So, and it's said that if you are, especially in the last 10 days, if you put the extra effort to kind of try to align with what it is that you're looking for your future, you can almost ask for a way to almost create your destiny. I think in the Jewish tradition, it's called Yom Kippur. In Islam, it's called the Night of Power, and it almost suggests that it's the time where you basically review what your past has been, and you ask for, it's almost like recognizing what errors you might have made and to ask for forgiveness, and then try to plan for the future to say, I'm going to maybe sidestep these mistakes that I maybe made, and then what can I look for in the future. So, being someone who used to love listening to recitations, and some of um, there are certain invocations that are usually practiced or recited during that month, as though because like the prophet used to give us examples of these are the things that you can ask for in life, and it's almost like it's almost enabling you to ask for eternal bliss and then to have that align with you. So because I never used to think of life and death as a cycle yet, it was just like, okay, I just want to end my life in a good situation so that I could just be done, right? And I have like my aunt's husband. He passed away when he was in prayer, but he was doing the prostration. And our understanding is that when a person passes away, um, in whatever state they are, that's usually how they're resurrected. So in my mind, I was just like, that's such a like, what a fortunate thing is that you're basically in prayer and then you die. So it's almost like you're in perpetual remembrance. Like, what a fortunate thing. Like, what did you do in your life to kind of get that? So that's kind of what I would almost pray for is like, I just want that because life was so difficult to understand. I couldn't understand what jinn was. I didn't even want to go there. I was just thinking about, what? I went to school with like this intention to study because it allows us to know that we can allow our intellect to be suspended and not to actually think too deeply about these things, and just say that since I had the intention to help myself in a way, whatever ends up happening, I know it was like a healthy destiny, almost like a happy fate. So the fact that none of this makes sense and still doesn't almost um, makes me wonder about that night of power, because in the Quran it mentions that it's better than 83 years. So if you catch that night and you make a prayer and it's accepted, then it's almost like you can basically do whatever you want in life. Like if that one night is accepted, then if you do something for your entire life that's just misaligned, because you have that one night that is equivalent to 83 years, like a lifetime, you can basically try whatever you want, and maybe that's going to be a time where there is like a leap in progress in some way. So maybe that is what initiated this whole idea of trying things outside of the norm of an orthodox tradition, because I was just like, I don't know what to think anymore. Like, assuming um at that point it was 26 years, and I'm thinking, okay, so there's like 83 years that I'm supposed to figure out, and then time expands and it shrinks. How do I how does a person live for like over 100 years, but they're still like in their 20s or their 30s, and what am I supposed to make out of this? And so that's just it. Like, different social orientations around sexuality was the thing that was kind of becoming normalized in the world. Also the idea for me around how to understand um, different worldviews and integrating them outside of my tradition of Islam was something that I was trying to figure out. And at the time, my tone was very, very like aggressive. It was almost like I'm trying to almost prove to myself that God exists and there is something in the world. So whenever I'd write ideas, it was almost like I was questioning, like, is all of this legitimate? Like, what is reality? So I had completely withdrawn. Like, I was working at a childcare setting, and I didn't really make friends at work, and it was just kind of from school, from work to home, and then thinking about these ideas, and then just evolving with that. And then after my dad died, I was thinking uh, of traveling abroad to teach English, and when that didn't pan out, I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna take some time off, and I stopped working at the school board, and I almost just dropped everything and just thought, I'm just going to retreat. Like, I'm just going to. And I read Imam al Ghazali, and he had done the same thing where there just came a moment in time where he seemed to just misalign with reality, and he almost had to reassess like what he understood of reality. And so he took some time off and he traveled and stayed away for almost 10 years, some narrations say. And that's basically what I ended up doing. Like, I told my family, I'm like, I'm just going to hang out in my room. I'm going to try this retreat. I'm going to stay in for 40 days, and I'm just going to try not to talk to anybody. And I'm kind of like those silent retreats that I talked about in some Buddhist traditions. And with that, I didn't really feel like I got an answer. And I was thinking of traveling to figure out, like, what is it about jinn possession, and what do I understand about myself? I didn't hear any voices inside my head, but the fact that I was constantly paranoid was something that I couldn't really come to grip with. And we do have a family, like in my family, in my dad's side, we have a history of mental health struggles. So I didn't really think of it much other than to say that stress in the world can sort of turn on um, these gene expressions. So if you have something that's kind of dormant, and it can remain dormant in your life forever unless you're exposed to something very stressful, in which case it expresses itself, and then um, well, you kind of just have to figure out how to deal with it. So I never really thought of anything other than I'm just gonna kind of wait it out. And it wasn't until after COVID that I decided to just get a regular frontline. Like, I worked at a dollar store for a little bit, and it already felt like somebody had already assumed that I was a completely different person. Like, there was this kind of expectation that you're a persona that wasn't me, and I was just like, so to me it was like, what? And because you couldn't get any references because everything had kind of shut down, to me, I wasn't sure what to make of it. I was just like, I'm just gonna kind of go with it and wonder why people assume they know me. And here we are, like 3 or 4 years later, and not really much has changed other than that I'm trying to figure out what technology is, and how like AI in the kind of like internet world exists, and what it does with like reading faces, because we know of technology like you can have your eyes scanned, or you can have like your fingerprint kind of copied, and then it gives you access to like your technology, whatever it is. So all these things kind of made me wonder, like, I don't know from a religious perspective or not, like how you think about the universe and how you think about God, and how there is omnipotence outside of our immediate power, and like what we can do in our autonomy in the world. Um, if you are somebody who doesn't think that that exists in the world, are you more likely to try to create like a robot out of like a live human being? And then what are the consequences of that? So it's something to think about. I remember when I was in biology class first year, we had talked about cloning, and like what are the ethics and what are the questions we should have around cloning, and like back then it was regarding animals. So at the time I didn't think it was okay. From like a perspective of someone who understood that God exists in the world, I was just like, why try to play with something that already exists and you can't improve on God, basically, was my argument. But then later, the question of like organ harvesting and helping people um, almost extend their life became a question. And then my response was, but is the quality, because you have to take, um, if you are somebody who, for example, has like an organ transplant, you have to take medication to help your body not attack the organ, right? So then it's almost like you have to have the body align with itself. So my question was always like, if you're going to do that, is that actually going to improve the quality of life for you? Or is it still going to continue to diminish? And then why prolong that? Like, what is it about life that wants us to keep us engaged in life? Like, some people are afraid of death because they don't know what to expect, and the void is kind of scary. Who knows? There's a lot of valid reasons for why we kind of don't know how to think of death and maybe don't want to. But, and I've experienced this myself where um, sometimes going into sleep, you think, what if I don't wake up? And you kind of scare yourself a little bit. You're like, what happens? But when you think of when you're sleeping, nothing does happen. Like, how are you supposed to know the difference if you wake up or you don't? So it's a difficult thing to think about. But anyway, back to the story of Joseph. It just helped me remember that pulling these ideas in to almost look for love or understanding these deep emotions of love, you don't actually know what that does metaphysically to other people. So that was my mistake, and I didn't really know it at the time. And looking back in hindsight, I think I almost created that persona that, like, what are you somebody who would look for casual sex, or who would um, look for ways to make money from sex or solicit sex in any way? So I'm actually happy that I went through this as somebody who came from a conservative or orthodox tradition, because I think it's very difficult for girls, especially from these traditions, to hold up to a standard of, remain demure, remain pious, so that you have a guy that's going to find you attractive and want to marry you, right? Almost suggesting that, like, we haven't really moved much beyond Mary. Like, it's been like 2,000 years, and we still must have that expectation that a woman should not really have a voice and should kind of hang out in the background of society. And it's unfortunate because I feel like we're at two ends of that. Like, you'll have women who are very assertive, and they want to get ahead in life because for whatever reason, like maybe they're trying to enjoy some of the successes that affluence brings, but it becomes very hard for them to have a family because, I mean, work ends up taking up all their life. And on the opposite side of that is women who try to build a family and then end up having to maybe deal with all the parenting, and then later almost have to deal with that empty nest syndrome where I spent like the first 12 years of my marriage, or 18 years or 20 years of my marriage, looking after the family. And now that everyone's gone, I have to almost decide, like, what am I going to do with my life now? And what if, like, the marriage ends up dissolving, and then you're just like, you're kind of left out there thinking, I have nothing to help me. I have to, like, I have no skills, and my kids are all doing their own thing. And like, right? So it's just this really weird dichotomy. And I don't know really how to solve it for anybody, because every scenario is going to be different for everybody depending on their culture too. So I don't know what to do about it. And the more I think about this, the more I'm like, I'm given all this time, like, without a job, and thinking about all these ideas, and um, having, yeah, like, young nieces and nephews who are like kind of going into their teen years, and what is their expectation going to be from their family, or like from their social circles, kind of. And they tend to be resistant. Like, they still want to kind of hold that tradition and remain conservative, and almost hold that as an ideal, that this is what the family should look like, even though, like, they can see around them that it's not always a successful way of living. And especially in a postmodern world now, where things are becoming very distinctly personal. So something that might have worked for parents or grandparents or uncles or aunts may not work for, like, the next generation after that. So it's hard to say. It's part of the reason why I'm putting out these videos and trying to understand like, new realms of reality that we maybe never thought to think about. Um, and also, like, I kind of mentioned that now that it can be almost said that we're not necessarily at the end of time, but almost like a cycle of time where we can have new understandings of reality, and almost think, okay, well, what if there was not quite an end, but we're closer to where we were with Adam and Eve, where we're more enabled to understand what is that low tree, or that tree of limitless knowledge almost. And then to think, I mean, is that what heaven is supposed to be, where you feel like I have an understanding of what my capacity is as a human, and in spite of that I want to limit myself and just wait for like inspiration and redirection in some way. And in that case you can think back to why religion can be a very personal thing, because it becomes, even though I'm part of a collective group, for example, like a Canadian, um, and we're trying to uh, continue to almost value the freedom of expression as being like something that's a human right across the world, and it continues to kind of work itself into societies. What's to stop somebody from saying, um, I want to affiliate with Christianity, for example, or Judaism, or Islam, or Baha'i, or like whatever it is, Hinduism, Buddhism, like whatever these religions are, but I want to keep like a unique identity that isn't easily discernible by anybody. Like you'd actually have to sit and have a conversation with me to understand how I understand these ideas. And now that we're kind of given more time to think about these ideas, I think people would be willing to maybe not necessarily associate with these traditions as such, and almost say, this is not something I've really thought about, and I'd like to think about it, but I just haven't had the time yet. So that almost creates almost like a way of saying, I'm familiar maybe with what these traditions were, and maybe my understandings aren't even accurate, but maybe it's something I'm starting to think about. So it almost kind of creates an invitation to think together collectively without the typical stereotypes and stigmas that we're kind of usually used to, and that almost kind of push people away from wanting to delve into these kind of questions and ways of thinking. So long story short, it was kind of a roundabout way of thinking of a story um, that's very known, and in spite of that you can, like I said, kind of glean different lessons from it based on what your actual personal history has been, and then think of how you can almost look for a hopeful outcome at the end. Because even though like Joseph's life was like, he had spent I don't know how many years in prison after his family almost abandoned him, and then at the end it was like, well, now you have a hopeful place in the world where you can actually be your independent self. So you never know, like that's kind of why I am patient with myself, and I'm trying to convey that, when you have these ruts or these pauses in life, don't always assume that you should fall into despair. Just think, as long as I'm doing a little bit of something every day, almost allowing myself to think of new ideas and almost put myself out there for the universe to align, and in finally figuring out, how to put it all together and kind of create maybe a new niche in the world for yourself and for others.